Hi, I'm Jess Fields. Welcome to the show. The other day, I interviewed Idaho State Representative Heather Scott. Scott represents District 1A in the lower house of the Idaho State Legislature. This includes Bonner and Boundary counties, which, if you look at a map of Idaho, is at the very northern tip, the panhandle of Idaho, right next to the Canadian border. Scott believes that the government has overreached in the coronavirus pandemic, not just at the state level, but also the federal level. Specifically, she believes that local governments, such as the counties that she represents, have the ability to say, we're not going to enforce the orders from Boise, the state capital there in Idaho. This has been a controversial position, and recently a New York Times piece was written about Scott and other individuals in northern Idaho who are resisting the orders to stay at home and not assemble during the coronavirus pandemic. Regardless of your beliefs, I think you'll find this to be an interesting interview with Idaho State Representative Heather Scott. Joining me now is Representative Heather Scott. She represents District 1A in the Idaho State Legislature, which comprises Bonner and Boundary counties at the very northern tip of the Idaho Panhandle. Representative, thank you for joining me today.
Nice to join you. Thank you for having me on.
So I noticed that you had made yourself kind of an opponent of policies that deal with overly reacting to the coronavirus situation, and thought it would be interesting to get your perspective. But before we go into that, I want to ask you about your district. Tell me a little bit about northern Idaho and the panhandle of Idaho. I mean, you're basically right next to Canada.
Yes, I can still see snow out my window. So it's a little cold up here. It's a little dark in the winter. It's pretty politically active. And it's just good people. Good. We have a lot of retired police officers from California that move up here. We have a lot of veterans. We have a lot of young families moving in. It's just kind of a big mix. It used to be a big timber area, but not so much these days, just with the forest all locked up. And so it's a nice place to live. We have nice long days in the summer, and the winter's a little dark, but sometimes that's okay.
So politically speaking, northern Idaho would be perhaps a little bit more conservative than, say, Boise, where I've read elsewhere that Boise is kind of one of the next big technology cities, and a lot of young people are moving to Boise, and the politics are changing. And Idaho maybe is changing a little bit, but northern Idaho remains pretty conservative. Is that right?
You bet. We are probably one of the most conservative areas in the state. And I always remind my constituents is that they just don't think like us down there. So it's definitely a different world in Boise.
So how many state representatives and what kind of population are we talking about in that area of Idaho up there?
So it's by population in our state. We have about 40,000 people in 2 counties, and that's our voting district. Some of the districts in Boise itself, there's about 10 different districts in that county. But up here, we only have 1 district for 2 counties. So that consists of 2 representatives and a senator.
Okay, so you have 2 representatives as District 1A, and then there's, I guess, a District 1B.
Well, no, the 2 representatives are 1A and 1B and a senator. So there's 3 legislators from each district. And the state of Idaho is set up into 35 districts. So there's 70 House members and 35 Senate members.
Okay, perfect. So in terms of the makeup being a little bit more conservative, you have taken a pretty strong stance on the constitutional questions raised by stay-at-home orders and other things as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Could you just kind of lay out a little bit what your position is and maybe when you started to have those kinds of concerns?
Well, sure. I don't know that I see it as such a strong stance. I think it should be a common stance across our country. When I see people's rights being violated. When one person can basically erase the Constitution and say we're not going to allow these things, they're trying to take away inalienable rights. I don't think it's a big deal to stand up to that. I think it's my duty as a representative of the people. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to uphold, the Constitution, which protects their rights. And so I don't see it as a big deal. I just, I see a bunch of reaction to it because a lot of people are afraid to stand these days.
So I think you, along with some other folks in Northern Idaho, recently got a little bit of publicity in the national media, along with the Bundy family that had more recently, I think, resisted some orders in Eastern Oregon with regards to federal land. I mean, what does the coalition look like up there in terms of people that are raising these concerns? What you say should be common concerns. Who is this group of people up there?
I think it's a lot of citizens of Idaho. You know, the liberal media, we have to remember, Jess, that they're always trying to sell papers. And so they always need a controversy, and they need fighters, and they need this and that. But, you know, most of the people in our state, most of the rural people, I will say, they're limited government people. They don't, they're willing to stand up for their rights. They don't like to be trampled over. They don't like to be overtaxed. And, you know, the media, especially the New York Times you're referring to, I mean, there's no comparison, Idaho and New York. I mean, it's two different worlds. So of course, anyone in our state would look crazy to them. But, you know, they try to group people. They try to say this group or this, I think they call, what did they call it? I don't remember the article, but I try to block these crazy guys out, but what's it? It was some like Liberty group, or I don't know. Just, I guess overall, we have 3% groups, we have patriot groups, we have militias, we have health freedom groups. I mean, our state is full of liberty-loving citizens, and that's why a lot of people move to our state. We've had people flooding into our state, a lot from California in the last few years because of the health freedom issues with vaccinations and the forced vaccinations on citizens and children, and we have people flocking here for that reason.
So I want to ask you, I want to ask you more about the coronavirus, but I want to kind of revert and ask you about this, because you are saying that in a sense, Northern Idaho is a block of people that have a very strong view of constitutional government, and they're there maybe in somewhat for that reason, that the area represents those values, perhaps, is kind of what you're saying. So what are the top issues for people who are in Northern Idaho? Let's push coronavirus aside. Let's just say, you know, top 3 or 4 issues that people worry about. I know you mentioned forced vaccinations. Is that a top issue? I mean, other things, or?
I wouldn't say that's a top 3 issue. No, I think limited government. I think taxes. I think being able to use our land. I think the Constitution's very important, and we have a constitutional sheriff up here. That's a big deal, especially in times of tyranny, kind of what we're going through right now as a country, I believe. And so I would say, you know, of course, everyone's concerned about the roads and the schools and business, and I get that, but putting the big ones aside, you know, and our guns. We are a very gun-friendly area. It's just 100% pro-guns up here.
So you mentioned a constitutional sheriff. What does that look like?
That looks like a sheriff that will not enforce unconstitutional law. So, you know, just because we have a legislature that passes bills or passes laws, it doesn't mean that those don't violate the Constitution. And if that's the case, we have a sheriff that understands his role as a sheriff, and he understands his role as the highest law enforcement in the area. And so I think that's important for protection when it comes to federal overreach. And I don't know what that looks like all the times, because I trust that he's doing his job. So I'm not really that engaged in it, but I have comfort in it when shenanigans go on. And I could give you some examples of in the past. I know someone in our county is looking out for the citizens.
So when you say our county, I know you mentioned Bonner and Boundary counties. Which county specifically are you referring to?
I'm in Bonner County personally.
Bonner County.
But Boundary County is about the same. So really good guy. We got real conservative, God-fearing men up there, and it's just great. It's just great.
So let's now go kind of back to the coronavirus, because I think it's
that's what everyone wants to talk about.
Everyone wants to talk about it, and but I think your principles play into that, obviously, and so the governor obviously issued, as pretty much every governor in the United States has, some orders in Idaho to stay at home and limit assembly and so forth. And you issued a letter and a video to your constituents, and you called it the virus that tried to kill the Constitution. So tell me a little bit about that, and what specifically you want your constituents to do about the coronavirus pandemic and these orders from the governor.
Well, some of the order was actually violating the Constitution. So when you, and I don't have the sheet in front of me, I had it up earlier for an interview, but I could go down through the Constitution on all the violations. You cannot have, you can't have any elected official, whether it's a mayor or a governor, interfere with your right to assembly, peaceably assembly. You can't have it's illegal. An elected official does not have the authority to tell you that your business is essential or non-essential. That's the one that put me, I think that's the one that made me start putting my pen to the paper. Because when you have government, that elected official is government. And when you have government telling you that your business is essential or non-essential, and another one, yours is non-essential and someone else's is essential, we have a problem there. I mean, that's no different than the Nazi Germany, where you had government telling people you were an essential worker or a non-essential worker, and the non-essential workers got put on a train. That's crazy. And that's when I said he can't do that. And I checked with the I'm not a lawyer, but I checked with a constitutional lawyer, and absolutely he cannot do that. You can't, he has no authority. The Constitution gives him authority and does not give him this authority to erase the Constitution. You just can't do it.
So when Governor Little put out these orders, is that when you first took notice of this, or was it sometime before that and you realized that this was going to be a problem for you and your constituents? These things were coming down the pipeline.
Well, it's funny. Jess, I had went back to the CPAC event. I don't know if you know what that is. So I went there to get an award with another legislator. We went to get our award. We came back, and then we get a panic call. Someone from the event had the coronavirus, and we had the health department calling us, and they didn't know what was going on, but they said, you need to self-isolate. They didn't know why they were.
This was the same reason I think that Ted Cruz went into isolation, right? Apparently that he had contact. That was reporting was that he went to CPAC and several other folks, and they had contact with this individual who apparently later tested positive. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. They didn't know if we had contact with that, but there were hundreds of people. Well, there were thousands of people there, but there were hundreds of people there, probably from Idaho. but they had known because we got an award and put our picture on Facebook. So I felt like I was being targeted, and they wanted me to sit at home for 2 weeks instead of vote in the legislature.
When you say
Now,
they, who was it specifically asking you to stay at home?
I'm not going to go there right now.
Okay. Well, was it a political
Yes,
entity or
it
so
was a
political
political.
officials? It wasn't
It
like
was
a State Department that said you
no,
had.
it was a political. So it was someone in the body. So that being said, um, I thought that's the first indication something's different. Something's going on here. I'm not sure what's going on, but this is weird. Why is why is a health department calling people in my legislature, telling them that I need to stay home and I may have been exposed to a disease? It didn't seem like the proper channels, number one. And number two, they really didn't know why they were telling me. They just were telling me. So that's when I realized something was going on. And then you had the president come out, and it just kind of unfolded pretty quickly. And that's kind of when I knew something wasn't quite right. But when the governor came out and did that, did his emergency order, I didn't pay a total lot of attention to it. And then people were like, well, people can't leave. And when I dug into it, it's like, he can't do that. And so, and I'm really good at doing newsletters to educate my citizens across the state. And I put out a lot of newsletters. So when I realized what he had done, I said, here's why he really doesn't have the authority to do that. Now, ultimately, as we know, unless citizens hold him accountable, he can get away with anything. And any politician can get away with anything if the citizens do not hold them accountable. So I wanted to raise awareness. It's ultimately up to the people where all the power is, if they want to exercise that power and push back on unconstitutional edicts.
So when you put this out there and you started raising some of these concerns, I know you say you don't have a strong opinion about it or a strong concern maybe, but certainly you recognize that there's not a lot of public officials that are going out saying the same thing you're saying in the nation.
Because when you do, the New York Times writes a nasty article about you, and you get a doctor from Kootenai County that says you come to their hospital, you're not going to get a respirator if you're sick. So people don't like to, legislators don't like to put their heads out there because it's painful to stand up for the people.
So when you put this out there, what was the response? I mean, did you get an immediate blowback? Did you get a lot of positive, or was it mixed?
I get 40 calls a day. Then I take a few off my phone and I get 40 more. So, and I get about 500 or 600 emails a day. And so I just do the best I can to answer the ones I can, but it's all over the board. I've had people from all over the country call and thank me for standing up for their rights. And I was like, I couldn't understand. I looked at, there wasn't that many people that actually watched the video. So I'm like, how do they know this? So I had someone from Florida, someone from Maine, New York, Texas, and somewhere else, and a bunch of others. But those were the first ones. I'm like, where are these people getting this from? But I think when people hear liberty, or they hear about somebody standing up for their rights, that they understand their rights. And I think that's the problem, is a lot of people don't even understand these are their rights. They are God-given rights. They don't get that. They think government can tell them what to do, and it's our own fault with our public schools, what we've allowed over the years, but that's probably another show.
Sure. So in terms of the policy itself, I'm not going to say that you have any interest in running for governor, but if I'm going to make you governor for a minute here,
Okay.
I'm going to ask you that if you were in Governor Little's position and everything is sweeping across the country and people are starting to die in New York and nearby Washington and so forth, What
right?
would you do in that position to act on the coronavirus pandemic?
I would say, fellow citizens of Idaho, okay? Um, we are in a free society, and we have a scary sickness coming, and little is known about it, and the media is turning it into a hyper. I mean, they're freaking out about it. It's hard to get the facts, and I am very concerned for every one of you in Idaho, and I'm going to request that people social distance. I'm going to request that if you can work from home, you work from home. You do what you think safe, but you have, in a free society, and Idaho is still a free society. This is if I'm talking, not who's talking now. If this is a free state, it is up to you for your personal health. If you are immune, have immunity issues, if you're elderly, if you know elderly, help your neighbors, be there from the neighbors. And I would never tell the churches they had to shut down. What this governor did is he told the churches, you'll shut down, but the liquor stores, you're okay, you just social distance. This is the first time in history, any pandemic or any big disease that's come through the country, they never have told the churches to shut down. The churches have always remained there to help the people. And if you recognize with this big scare, who's there for the people? FEMA. The government will help you, even their big stimulus money. It's the CARES bill, the government CARES bill. I mean, so back to what I'd say, churches, do what you can do to help the elderly and the sick in your communities. And I will keep you updated, and I will keep my legislators updated so they can keep their citizens updated. And if you have concerns, call. And then I would set up the structure. That's the one thing that the governor has that legislators do not have, is we do not have staff. I don't even have a secretary. You're looking at my wall because I don't want you looking at my desk. And so I would have those staff members, I would have team meetings, and I would get them prepped for what's coming and set up the structure that my state would need. And so my concern is how he handled this. And my other big concern is the data he is using and the scare tactics being used by the media. And I think he is buying right into it. I've been digging up numbers. I mean, I can't help myself. And when I found out that last year's flu, we had 35 million cases, 35.5 million cases. And this COVID, we have 468,000. That's nationwide. We had 34,000 people die of the flu last year. We're just not even close to that. And so I guess when I see those numbers, anyway, I could go on. I'm just concerned that we're overreacting. And so I would ask the citizens of Idaho to be patient, to follow this website that will be set up to help give you information. But I would never tell people to stop working or close their businesses, or this is ridiculous, to close people's businesses and to close the churches and then to leave the liquor stores open. That's just nuts. That is just nuts.
Do you think that the government, let's say the state government of Idaho, do you think the government has any authority to change people's behavior or businesses' behavior in a forcible manner in response to an emergency situation, whether it's this or something else? So
I would say I would choose the emergencies very carefully. 15 people have passed away from this disease, which is horrible. Okay, but that is not an emergency. That isn't. We're killing 35 babies a week for abortions. I can't find the numbers I got for the state for all the people that die here. Oh, here we go. So in 2017 we had 33,000 people die of cancer. Now we've had 15 die of COVID. And I just found out today, Jess, that the money they're getting for this, maybe I'm getting off track, but the CDC and the American Medical Association now has a 7-page document, you've probably seen this, for doctors on how to fill out the death certificates to favor COVID over on the death certificate, to get that COVID on their death certificate.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that. Do you want
So
to
it came out today. I'm sure you'll see it in the news, but it actually aired on Fox News yesterday. But there's a senator out of Minnesota, Dr. Scott Jensen, and then there's another doctor, and they've got the documents there. But right now they are getting $13,000, the hospitals are, if you have an admission for a person with COVID. And if you put that person on a respirator for that, you get $39,000 from the federal government. That's telling me something's not adding up here. So anyway, I would pick my emergencies carefully and not jump on the bandwagon of an agenda. And I kind of am starting to see this is more of an agenda than a real emergency. When we went from millions of people that were supposed to have it, and now their projections are maybe 20 to 40,000 people. All our models are wrong. You've probably seen that. This
Well, I think
was overhyped.
So I think, if we had a health official on, I think what the health official would say is that the reason the numbers are lower is because all these measures have been taken. I mean, is there anything to that?
Yeah, and I posted some really good doctors on my Facebook site, if you go check those out. But they say social distancing is going to be a problem by staying away from it, because what's going to happen is there's going to be a second infection once people get back out. And that's just kind of how, you herd immunity, that's how that works. That's how every single flu bug goes through the system. And so I don't know that that it has made a huge difference or not. I've got numbers from the other states, and the data shows that the states that are not self-isolating and social, or not the social distancing, but quarantining all their people and locking them up, those states have lower numbers than the states that have everybody on lockdown. So that right there tells me the governor or any elected official in charge of a situation like this needs to be looking at accurate data. And so that's where I would suggest that's critical to determine, is this really an emergency or is it overhyped by the media for an agenda?
So I want to ask you, because you come from a very constitutionally minded perspective. And so if this isn't an emergency, you say pick emergencies very carefully, then I would ask you, what does represent maybe an emergency where, say, the government of the state of Idaho could intervene and, cause some major changes in society for some period of time?
So I would say a huge earthquake, things we see on the coast. Idaho's kind of, we don't get the hurricanes, we don't get some of the weather that other places get, but we get fires. And I think a huge fire, and there was a 1910 fire that came through this area. And so I think there are real emergencies. I honestly am not believing this is one of them.
So a weather disaster, something like a large fire that affects most of this or a large part of the state, an earthquake, some kind of natural disaster,
right?
Something like that. You would say the state government can force businesses to close in a situation like that, can cause people to do certain things, maybe that they're trying to do right now with coronavirus.
So I will give this credit. I just listened to David Barton the other night. I think he's from your state. And he says, um, extreme action of government for an emergency, it has happened and it can happen. It needs to be temporary, limited, and universal. And so I think you need a strong leader in a position that they can determine, is this the emergency that they need to take extreme action of government? Because I believe what they've done is extreme action of government. And so I would say this would not be the emergency. I would be taking extreme, because Idahoans are great people. And I think if you said, we don't know how this spreads, we don't know a lot about it, but we are requesting you do these items. Here's some tips. Here's what we'd like you to do. Here's what we're asking you to do. But we understand that you're an individual. But I think personal responsibility is huge, because when all the responsibility lies on your government telling you what you can do and what you can't do, we might as well be living in China or North Korea.
So you mentioned a little earlier skepticism about the federal relief and payments and things like that. Some of the, we have a $2 trillion federal relief bill that just passed in Congress. They're looking at other action as of this interview. And then the Federal Reserve has taken trillions of dollars of action in the marketplace and with banks and financial institutions. How much of this kind of government action do you feel should come from the federal government, and then how much from the state government? Because there has been a great deal of federal action, and obviously the states have really been the ones to say, the quarantining or the stay at home, but the federal government's passing a large relief bill. Where is the balance there? Where's the mix?
I just did a newsletter on the CARES bill and kind of went through, the money, and I just haven't had time to spend in it to really have a strong opinion. I just stick with the basic principle. The borrower is always a slave to the lender. That's just a basic principle. And so, I don't see us being so much slaves to our state as I see the states being slaves to the federal government. And of course they're going to take the money. Everyone takes the money. So it would take a really strong leadership in a state who would be able to stand firm without taking that federal money, use their own resources, and basically not. And I just don't see that happening in Idaho. So I'm not sure. I can't remember what your question was.
So as far as the balance, you would say the balance has tipped in favor of the federal government and away from the states, it sounds like.
Well, that's the way our whole government was set up, to where everybody wants to have the most control. All power's in the people, but they don't even realize it. So they never exercise it. So everyone else is letting them think they're powerful. And so it's always this struggle for the federal government wants to grow bigger, and the state really allows it a lot. So I think it's tipped in favor of the federal government, and it, that money will come with strings attached. I've seen a couple preliminary things on that. I don't know in depth stuff, stuff on Medicaid and how that's going to expand that and all that, but I don't know. I just, ultimately, when you borrow money, you're slave to the lender. And so I don't know, they can just print it these days. So maybe there's this new, I guess, this modern, what's it called? Modern monetary system or theory. And so basically you can just print as much money and it's not going to inflate things as long as you don't tap out all your resources. So I guess we're in new times.
So as far as you're not obviously the governor of Idaho, and you're not in a position to make all of the policy for your area. But I know you
Right,
mentioned constitutional sheriffs and folks like that.
right.
So are the sheriffs of those panhandle counties refusing to enact the governor's orders, or what's the situation there?
So, you're seeing all across the country tyranny at every level, and you see these mayors who are saying, if you don't close your business, we're going to give you a fine, or we're going to bring the police force in. Or there's some states that are arresting. They are arresting people for being out. One guy was with his daughter in a park, and they arrested him right in front of his daughter, and a kayaker by himself. So um, that's not happening in my county. That is not happening in my county. So I don't know about the rest of the state. I get reports back. I haven't confirmed everyone, but what I ultimately tell citizens is this is the opportunity to really put your elected officials to the test. Did you elect a tyrant? Did you elect one that's going to work for the citizens, or is he going to use this as an opportunity to gain more control over the people? And so I think it's a great opportunity for that, because if you are having an issue in your county, you need to go to your sheriff and show them in the Constitution where this is unconstitutional, and where your sheriff has taken an oath to uphold that Constitution, and ask him to back off on enforcement, whatever that may look like. So a mayor the same way. And I don't know what that looks like across the state. I haven't heard a lot of reports. I sat in on a couple calls yesterday and or 2 days ago, and the head law enforcement officer for the state, the director of the Idaho State Police, said that they were just educating for our state, and just educating people, and that was it. So it's one thing to ask, and it's another thing to force. And I'm not seeing the forcing at this moment statewide, but I'm sure it's happening in some of these counties. Or I'm
So
sorry, some of these city limits.
sure. So Sheriff Daryl Wheeler, is that the
Mhm.
sheriff in Bonner
Yep.
County? Um, and so if you have a gathering, for example, in your county, let's just say it's a church service or a funeral service or something like this that people tend to gather for, even in the worst of times. And if a call is made to the sheriff's office, is anything going to be done, or are they just going to not respond? Or
I do not believe anything will be done. I actually had a pastor call me yesterday who's been going back and forth with the chief of police up in Boundary County, and they're meeting on Easter Sunday. They're going to be meeting on Easter Sunday. I know of other churches in my county that are meeting on Easter Sunday, and I would just like to say, I would we need to respect people for exercising their rights and not bully them. The people that it seems like there's so many people that are so quick to bully these people for actually exercising their rights. That blows my mind.
so you're taking a position that is kind of you're kind of taking a position in favor of the rights of people here. But if somebody asks you specifically, they ask for your advice. I mean, I'm sure that happens because a
All the
state
time.
representative is a very prominent figure in the community. So what are you telling people when they say, "Hey, Representative Scott, we're thinking about doing XYZ. Should we do it? Can we do it? Are we going to get arrested? What do you think?" What are you telling them? Or maybe you have some stories about that. I'm sure that has happened.
I have lots of those questions every day. And you know what I say? I say, I am government. Don't ask government. You use your personal responsibility. You make that decision on your own. Do not ask government what you should do and how you should do it. I am looking out for your rights and your freedoms, but don't ask government. I try to not tell people, because that is not That is not the role of government. I do not believe that is the role of government. And so I try to hold myself to the standard that I think government should be. I give them an opinion like, well, and I try to talk them through it, but I don't like to tell people, I don't like to tell people that's not government's role.
So you don't want to tell people what to do, but if somebody's asking you your opinion, let's say somebody in your family or close to you, hey, what do you think? Do you think we should get together, gather? I mean,
Right.
what is your personal conduct? If it's personal responsibility, what is your personal conduct with regards to the virus? Have you changed how you've acted in your own life?
I personally um, don't like to be told to do things that I know I'm allowed to do. I don't know many people that do. So when the government says you need to stay home, and I know that they have no authority to do that, it makes me want to go out more. I don't usually like to go out that much, but I definitely want to go out more. The thing is if we just ignore this, our rights go away. I'll give you a good example. Here's two examples. Right over the border, I'm close to the Washington border, and there's a movie theater or some community building up there that they have a sign, no guns allowed. And they put it up, and I don't know how long it's been up, and this group has a meeting, and they said, well, we don't meet there anymore because there's a no guns allowed sign up. And I said, well, did you guys ever say anything? Well, it went up a year and a half ago, and we never said anything, and nobody does it anymore. And so then society changes, and nobody carries a gun in there. Well, there's a community center in my town, and a sign went up, and within a month, they were threatened with a lawsuit if they didn't take the sign down. And the sign was removed, and people carry guns and still meet in the community building. There's two different approaches. But now those next generations that use that building, that public building up over in Washington, society's changed because people just know, oh no, we don't carry guns into that building. And so if nobody goes out and nobody says, you can't tell us we can't go to church, you can't shut down businesses, then it will just become the norm. And people will think that anytime government tells them what to do, they have to do it. And that is, when it comes to your rights and exercising your rights, that is not appropriate for government.
In those counties that you represent, where you obviously have sheriffs that aren't maybe as keen to enforce the state's orders, are bars, restaurants still open? Because I, as far as I can tell, and I haven't read it exhaustively, but the stay-in-place order in Idaho is as restrictive as anything else anywhere in the country. So maybe more so in some respects, I don't know. And so that would mean that restaurants aren't allowed to be opened. Here in Houston, restaurants aren't open. So are they open in Bonner and Boundary counties, or?
It's just sporadic. I know businesses that are open. I know businesses that aren't open. I mean, it's the business owner's choice. I think the problem we run into is the county sheriff does not have jurisdiction within the city limits. And most of our restaurants and stores are within city limits of Sandpoint. So you have a mayor there that doesn't even stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm guessing there's not much open in Sandpoint. Because my guess, I don't know for sure, and I can't say without doubt, but I know some of those businesses are open because I know some of them he's probably afraid of.
So in this area of Idaho, what it sounds like to me is that it's almost like you have two different states, maybe in Idaho. You have like, I mean,
it's if
seems
you want
like
to say anything, you could say rural versus urban, or you could say Ada County versus the rest of Idaho. That's a better way to
Boise
say it.
is Ada County is.
Ada County's in Boise's in Ada County. I mean, they say it's the great state of Ada. That's what the big joke is. They run the state same way Seattle runs Washington.
Well, it's
Or
I guess it's the state obviously is trying to take this action. It doesn't sound like they're being very successful though in having businesses or
no.
residents change their behavior. Whereas obviously in other parts of the country, people are taking this very seriously, and local officials are following state orders. But it sounds like in Idaho, a lot of folks have just decided to basically ignore state orders and go on with business as usual.
That is definitely, I just talked to a gentleman out of Moscow tonight, or he's in Latah County. I'm not sure he's in Moscow city limits, but he said there's people all over down there running around. So, I mean, I don't know that they put anyone in jail yet or fined them. So, and I think the governor's going to be getting a lot of pressure over the next couple of weeks if he does not lift this. Because, I mean, you got to understand, Idaho is the long winters in Idaho. People have been cooped up for a long time, and so for a tyrant to say you're going to be locked down for another 2 months or a month, and the data does not support what he's doing. It doesn't support it. These states that are not on lockdown have less cases than what we have, and the models are changing every day. And when you look, a lot of stuff's come out in the last couple days with the CDC, and I just think that if you've got a real emergency, that's one thing. But let's not ride this wave, or if you've gone down the wrong road, I think people will forgive you if you stop and turn around and get back on the right road. And I'm saying Idaho's on the wrong road as of today.
So, Representative Scott, I know that you're not the only state representative or legislator in Idaho who feels this way, who is concerned about government overreach relating to coronavirus. One story had State Rep Tim Remington from Coeur d'Alene. He's a pastor, and apparently he was having church services in defiance of the order, according to one report. But how many legislators in Idaho? I know you mentioned 35 state representatives. How many legislators in Idaho would you say agree with you, just on a percentage or a numbers basis?
That's hard to say. I mean, I talked to, we've been in session for 3 months. We all just got back to our families, and people are kind of doing their own thing. But I bet there's probably 35 House members, I would think, that would probably say, okay, enough's enough. Stop destroying our economy.
So so for the rest of the country, what percentage of the Idaho?
Of the representatives?
Of the legislature, yeah.
Maybe, let's say maybe 40%.
40%?
40% would say, okay, we've had enough.
So when you
at different levels, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I don't want to speak for anyone else.
But it's not just you and Representative Remington. There's a lot of people in Idaho, and obviously maybe some of them making that a little bit more public. And as I said, around the country, it's not very common for state officials to be voicing these concerns, which is why I'm talking to you in Idaho, because you're one of the few that's gotten traction. And yes, you were covered by the New York Times. Now, let's take a little bit of a reverse scenario. You said maybe in a couple of weeks the governor will feel the pressure and things will start to loosen, and that certainly seems likely. But what would happen if the opposite were true? What would happen if the governor decided to have the state start to crack down on the stay-at-home order in places like northern Idaho, or even do what some states have done and mobilize the National Guard to come in and enforce the orders or something like that? What would happen?
Trouble. I think you're going to see trouble when it comes to that. I do not think Idahoans will stand for it. It's hard enough to watch our executive branch follow in the steps of the liberal governors of California and Oregon and Washington. So if the executive branch goes that far, I think you're going to see trouble in Idaho, for sure.
Trouble like?
I don't think people will put up with it much longer. I personally don't. You never know what sets people off and what it is to their tipping point. But this is going to destroy Idaho's economy. It's going to destroy it. And I think I'm going to try to give the benefit of the doubt to our governor that he's got some common sense and is not going to go down this road any longer.
But if he does, it sounds like you're saying that some people would certainly even fight back really against the state government, that it would be not a good situation, obviously.
I do not think people will take much more of this personally. I mean, you never know. I mean, who knows? I'm sure the people in Boise would be fine for another 6 months. Who knows? But I don't see, you can't shut down people's lives like this. People will start educating others that this is life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And for to act as a dictator when there is the perceived emergency is over. Maybe you made a mistake, maybe not, but you can't take away people's lives and property without compensation. And that's exactly what he would be doing. I mean, they're already calling him Little Hitler, Governor Little Hitler. And so I think people will start educating others, and people will be more and more vocal until they will say enough of this and put the pressure, hopefully political pressure, on him. That's what I would hope for.
And do you feel like most of your constituents in Northern Idaho, they feel the same way? I mean, are they prepared to, take up arms if that's what it requires to fight back against state
I don't know that our country or our state's ready to take up arms. I mean, I don't, you never know. You never know what's going to, you sound like that liberal radio guy trying to get me to say something or do something, but
no, I'm curious. I mean, I listen, Texas won its independence as a country first before becoming a state. So, I mean, I understand that when you say there's a tipping point, I understand what you mean by that. And with unemployment rising, it's reasonable that some people would be pushed over the edge and they'd say, this is enough. I think what I'm trying to understand is I kind of know what that looks like in Houston, Texas, or in our state here. I don't really know what that looks like in Idaho, because obviously you're not Texas and you're in a whole nother part of the country. And if people are upset enough that they're ready to kind of say, hey, this is, not going to happen. I mean, for a sheriff to not enforce the governor's orders, that may be more normal in Northern Idaho. That would not happen here in this area of Texas, at this time, honestly. So, and it wouldn't happen in most states. So that already is a different standard. I think that's why I kind of am curious about that, because it is a different perspective on how the state relates to the counties and to these rural residents.
So, I mean, quite frankly, I think the whole country, we're way far away from arms, everyone taking up arms. But I do see Idaho is full of, we still have, can I say this? I guess I can compared to that reporter. We have some real men in Idaho. We have some real men. I'm sure you Texas, you got real men too. But we've got real men that know their rights, and God-fearing men, that we have veterans that have fought for this country and fought for these rights. These veterans and ex-police officers and real men, I mean, they're getting it. They probably already get it. They're just waiting. A temporary thing is one thing, but you add a couple more months of this and you're going to completely destroy Idaho. We will be so dependent on the federal government. And I think people, it takes different things to wake up different people. And nobody knows the future. We don't know where it's headed, but I can only pray that that our executive branch makes a decision to turn this thing around.
Well,
Get off this road.
one thing I do know about Idaho is that you have a lot of federal land there, and federal intervention in that respect. And I think that does breed some resentment among some rural landowners who have to deal with the federal government in that respect. So there is already some simmering resentment towards
Right.
federal land management, among other things. Is that fair to say?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely the federal government does a poor job of managing our lands, and that was evident a few years ago with all the fires. And they won't allow any logging on it. They've locked the people off the land. You can't recreate in a lot of the areas because there might be a grizzly bear 50 miles from where you might be. And so, yeah, there's a little bit, but um, I don't see the frustration with the federal government. I see the frustration with our current administration, our current executive branch.
In the
And
state
it's
government.
yeah, state government.
So
Yeah.
really, it is maybe in that respect very different than Texas and some other states where some folks here would want to point their ire towards Washington. But it sounds like in northern Idaho, in Bonner and Boundary counties, these other places, y'all's ire is pointed towards Boise, towards the state government and what the state government is doing to restrict the rights of Idahoans.
This week, a couple years ago it was a different story, but with the different administration in the White House. But yeah, I would say, people are pretty content here, and people really aren't too distressed with some of the decision government makes. But this decision is affecting a lot of people, and I think just from what I've seen, they're getting tired of it. And as the weather gets nicer here, they're going to get real tired of it. So I don't know. I feel like we're way down this. You never know what's going to happen. You never know people, and there's don't get me wrong. Not every person in my district feels this way. There are many people that praise the government for what they've done in protecting and just think, that I'm horrible for even the rights. I could read you emails that the rights should disappear. We don't have rights when it comes to sickness, that we need to step aside and put the Constitution aside, or we won't even have any people that the Constitution will be for. So, you hear all everything, everything.
Well, I certainly appreciate your perspective today and sharing that with us. And I guess as a final question, where do you think all of this is headed? What's your best prediction, realistically?
More federal control over the states, probably more global control over the nation. I see a lot of networks have been built up between the federal, the state, the counties, these networks, these machines to take care of the people. And I ultimately, the boundaries our jurisdictional boundaries are being chipped away at. And I think, we can use this time to help our neighbors and to connect, but we really need to use this time to identify who we have allowed. I always say elections have consequences. Who have we allowed to be in our government, and are they doing their job, and are they in their proper role of government, or are they trying to regulate and control every aspect of my life? And I think ultimately, that after this whole thing, we're going to have a new normal. I think we're going to have crisis after crisis after crisis, because if we can do it for, we have counties in our state that have 0 people with coronavirus that are on lockdown. So 0 people are sick, and we're being told by Ada County to shut your county down. Where will this end? I mean, so if they can do it for 0 sick people, what will be next? So I just really think that we need to be aware, we need to be awake, and we need to question everything. We really need to question everything and not allow things to slip by. Like right now with all this going on, our Idaho State Legislature has watched the governor basically change law. He's changed all our election laws. He's changed the date of when taxes are due unilaterally. He does not have the authority to do that. He just doesn't have the authority to do that. Do we challenge that? Do we challenge that and question that or bring it to the attention? I understand we're in an emergency, but every time you let something slip as a citizen and don't exercise your power, or as a legislature and you don't exercise your power, somebody's going to come in there and exercise it for you. And they're going to take control, and pretty soon you're going to lose you're going to lose your position. And so I don't know, that was kind of a long roundabout answer, but
Well, we certainly appreciate you being here and sharing your perspective. Idaho Representative Heather Scott, thank you for being with us today.
thank you, Jess. I appreciate you.
And that was Idaho State Representative Heather Scott. If you like our podcast, remember that you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and your favorite podcast app. We're on all of them. We also have a YouTube page. Please subscribe to that, and a Facebook page that you can like. If you want to be a guest on the show, or you have a good idea for one, please email us at jessfieldsshow@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.